Trump authorizing sanctions and heightened steel tariffs on Turkey. The administration threatening more if the country continues military operations in northern Syria. Vice President Mike Pence weighed in on this yesterday at the White House.
The United States of America is simply not going to tolerate Turkey's invasion of Syria any further. And we're calling on Syria to stand down, to end the violence, and come to the negotiating table.
And joining me right now is Kentucky Senator, author of the new book, The Case Against Socialism, Rand Paul. Senator, it's great to have you on the program this morning. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good morning, Maria. Thanks.
Senator, before we get to the topic of socialism, I know that you've become a very important source for President Trump, and he listens to you and certainly is grateful for your advice. I want to get your take on Turkey invading Syria.
You know, I think the real irony here is that our relocating our troops, Turkey's incursion, actually may allow an alliance to develop between the Kurds and Assad, which actually may allow the Kurds to have some sort of autonomous region within Syria. It happened in Iraq that way. The Iraqi Kurds have a semi-autonomous region because they're no longer a threat to Turkey. I think if Assad could assure Turkey that the Kurds in that region were no longer a threat to be invading into Turkey, I think there could end up developing a semi-autonomous region under Syrian sovereignty. But ultimately it means that the Syrians need to be part of the discussion. In the past, what has happened is the neocons and the war caucus has really wanted to topple Assad, and they haven't wanted to talk to Assad. Assad now has essentially won the war, for better or worse. He's staying. So Assad needs to be part of the peace deal. And I'm glad the vice president is talking to the Syrian regime, because if you don't talk to them, there'll never be peace.
Senator, is this in the U.S.'s national interest to pull out of Syria?
It's not in our national interest to be there, period. The president was very clear that the purpose was to defeat ISIS, not to create a nation out of Syria. Syria is a mess, and really Syria is more of a mess because of all the outside intervention. Had no one intervened in the Civil War 7 years ago, it probably would have ended in 6 months, and you wouldn't have had hundreds of thousands of people killed and millions of people displaced. The way we determine in our country whether something's in our national interest is we vote on it. That's why the Constitution put the power in Congress. We debate fully whether or not we're to go to war, and then Congress decides, not the president. Here's the interesting thing. All these people yelling and screaming about why we need to be in Syria, ask one of them who they want to declare war on. Have them come back to Washington. We'll declare war. We're going to declare war on Turkey, our ally, the Free Syrian Army, also allied with Turkey but used to be allied with us, or the Assad regime. Are we really going to declare war on any of those entities? So because it's so messy, we shouldn't have 50 soldiers in the middle of it. It's a disservice to our kids, to the young men and women who serve, to have them right in the middle of a war zone. 50 people deter nothing, and I think the president was absolutely right to get them out of a massacre.
But isn't it true that taking our troops out, leaving the Kurds vulnerable, opens up the oil fields in Syria to Iran? And, you know, the president had the Iranians on their heels, and now basically opening up those oil fields gives them the revenue to continue to support terrorists like ISIS.
I think it has nothing to do with Iran, actually. But what I would say is that this wasn't like the president said, oh, to Turkey, please come and invade into Syria. The Turks called the president and said, we are coming one way or another. You have 50 soldiers there, and we're giving you fair warning that 50 soldiers are not in a good place to be in front of tens of thousands of Turkish troops coming in. The president never promised to stay. The American people don't want hundreds of thousands of troops over there. We don't want another Iraq war. There is no national interest over there for us. So I think the president did absolutely the right thing, but he also did something where he had no choice. The people who think that the 50 troops were deterring the Turks, no, the Turks were always coming.
Okay.
And when they decided to come, they told us they were coming. And instead of having a massacre, the president did the wise thing and moved those troops.
Well, the president's getting a lot of pushback about this, as you know. And the Wall Street Journal editorial board this morning out with an op-ed writing this: Trump's Syria mess. Writing, Mr. Trump was able to project an image of strength in his early days as he prosecuted the war against ISIS and used force to impose a cost on Mr. Assad for using chemical weapons. But that image has faded as he has indulged his inner Rand Paul and claims at every opportunity that the main goal of his foreign policy is to put an end to endless wars. Senator, the board goes on to call it simple-minded isolationism.
Yeah. I would say that there's a certain naivete in the Wall Street Journal, the John Bolton, the War Caucus, to think that somehow they've made the Middle East better with their wars. Did toppling Saddam Hussein make the world safer, the Middle East better? Did toppling Gaddafi do it? So the Wall Street Journal has been in favor of regime change time and time again. They want regime change with Assad also. Here's the irony. The irony is, for all the criticism of the president over the Kurds, once they're allied with Assad, and if they can make a deal with Assad, will actually have a much better chance for a homeland within Syria than they've ever had in 100 years. And so, really, we need to have discussion, but we were having no discussion because nobody on our side, including the Wall Street Journal, are willing to talk to Assad. Assad has to be part of the peace process. So do the Turks. So do, frankly, the Russians. So do, frankly, the Iraqis. And so all of the players need to be part of the discussion. And what we should do is we should withhold arms in order to use the leverage of withholding arms to try to bring everyone to the table.
But isn't it true that the Kurds are really the ones that have been fighting here? The Americans have helped in terms of the armaments, like you just said, have provided the weaponry. We haven't lost a lot of, look, no life is okay to lose, right? We did lose a handful of people over the last 5 years. But when you look at the numbers, the Americans have not lost many, and it's really the Kurds that are fighting. We are just providing the backup with armaments.
Well, the Kurds live there, and so they're fighting to try to regain and retake their villages.
So what's wrong with the U.S. helping them to fend off the Iranians who want that oil?
Well, Maria, when we go to war in our country, the Constitution is very explicit how we go to war. We go to war by voting on whether or not we should go to war. So if America wants to go to war to protect the Kurds, we have a discussion, a national debate, and if you can convince enough Americans that it's in our national security interest to be at war in Syria, so be it. But I don't think that's what Americans want, and I don't think we should be in every godforsaken part of the earth in the middle of somebody's civil war. Here's the other irony about...
What if ISIS comes back? Senator, what if ISIS is back in business? What if ISIS gets to that oil, starts selling that oil, and has new revenue stream?
I know. It's a what if. You can say the what if in Afghanistan. You can say the what if in Libya, Mali. Well, but the thing is if you're going to say what if in every quadrant of the world, you can try occupying it, but we don't have enough money or troops to do it. So I think it's a mistake. I think we should get out of the Afghan war. I think we should get out of the Syrian war. I think we should be strong, have great intelligence. If we have to go and attack our enemies, we do. But if you'll ask our soldiers, do you want to be a policeman? Do you want to be the policeman of the world? Do you want to do nation building? Do you want to do road projects in Syria, road projects in Afghanistan? They'll say no. We'll kill the enemy, but we're tired of being stuck in these places for decade upon decade. The president did the right thing bringing the troops out.
All right, final question on this subject is about these sanctions. The president authorized sanctions and raised the steel tariffs on Turkey, also threatened more powerful financial penalties if they continue this offensive in North Syria. Is that enough? Do you think that's going to work?
I think we should withhold arms to Turkey and other countries like Saudi Arabia unless they're really behaving as true allies. And I don't think Saudi Arabia or Turkey has been. So I would withhold arms, and I think we have a great deal of leverage with that. I do think, though, that what's probably more important than sanctions or even withholding arms is actually what's happened on the ground in the last 24 hours. And I don't think this can be overstated. The alliance between Assad, the Russians, and the Kurds gives the Kurds, ironically, the best chance they've had for some kind of autonomy in some kind of region within Syria. And see, that's already been decided. So the sanctions might take effect and might have some influence over months and months and months. But the battle lines are going to be drawn much before that. If we could get the Turks now to talk to Assad, and Assad could reassure them that they're going to control their side of the border and there are going to be no incursions from these Syrian Kurds. The other irony about all the love for the Syrian Kurds is you realize that they're the Socialist Workers' Party. Basically, they're the Kurdistan Workers' Party. So actually, many of the Iraqi Kurds don't like the Syrian Kurds and have actually turned them into the Turkish government because they've been in favor of attacks across the Turkish border.
Wow.
This war has been going on 100 years, and we've got no business thinking that we're going to be the determining factor in a 100-year skirmish between the Kurds and the Turks.
All right, it's really important to get your insights on this, Senator.